Hello and good afternoon friends, welcome to CEC Live Lecture. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on disaster management, today we are going to talk on flood management in the first half, whereas we would be discussing on cyclones in the second half. And for this discussion, we have once again with us in our studios Dr. B.W. Pandey. Dr. B.W. Pandey is Associate Professor in Department of Geography, Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. Dr. Pandey has immense experience and he has contributed a lot in the area of academics till now. He has various research papers and journals, and many of his articles have been published in various reputed journals, both at national and international level. So dear friends, if you want to ask questions from Dr. B.W. Pandey on flood management as well as on cyclones, then you can call right in the studio. You can contact us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1800-110-430. Our number is, I repeat once again, 1800-110-430. Dear friends, you are requested to call in the last 10 minutes of the lecture so that the lecture goes uninterrupted and your queries are resolved after listening to the content which Dr. B.W. Pandey is going to deliver today. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. B.W. Pandey. Hello sir.
Thank you, Gitika. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, friends. This afternoon we are going to discuss the flood management in the first half, and the second half I will discuss about cyclone disaster, its spatio-temporal variations, causes and consequences of the cyclones. But the first half I would like to discuss about flood management. In the previous lecture I had discussed the causes and consequences of the flood, the spatial magnitudes of the flood, and spatial geohydrological analysis of the flood. Today, I will discuss flood management. Friends, if you talk about the flood management, so it is flood management to have an overview of different flood management strategies used in different parts of the world. You know, there are severity of floods in China, severity of flood in USA, severity of flood in India, and so many parts of the world. And every country has its own approach. Flood management, flood disaster management. So, we will discuss that what are different approaches and how successfully these approaches are implemented in the disaster management of the flood. And second point we will discuss is to understand the purpose of flood management. No doubt, the obvious purpose of the flood management is to reduce the impact of the flood, to reduce the loss of the lives and properties due to flood. And you know that flood is very much regular phenomena in India. Particularly North and Northeast India are affected by flood almost every year. And last point, the area which we will discuss today is to understand the relevance and outcomes of the strategies in flood affected areas. India is a land of diversity. We have different topographical characteristics, different hydrological characteristics, different climatological characteristics, and also India having a great variation to the sensitivity of the flood to mankind. Community resilience varies from one state to other state due to flood. States like Assam and Bihar, friends, you'll get the news every year that maximum loss of lives come from Bihar and Assam. As compared to Maharashtra, as compared to Tamil Nadu, as compared to Gujarat. It doesn't mean that the less area affected by flood. No doubt. But as compare, more areas affected in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal and Assam. But the severity of the flood, impact of the flood, community resilience to the flood is comparatively very vulnerable in Bihar and Assam because not incompetence of the government, not because of the failure of technology, not because of the poverty, rather you can say the more and more number of people living close vicinity to the flood. People living with the flood. During flood season in Bihar, West Bengal and Assam, most of the settlements are found along the natural levees of the rivers, Brahmaputra, Ganga and many other rivers. And both sides of natural levees there are inundation of the flood. So people living in the flood, that's why there is more number of casualties. So the strategies how to relocate the people so that the loss of life and property due to flood can be minimized. This will be the special talk of today. Before that, we'll have a glimpse of the total flood area affected. Almost on an average, you can find that almost 40 million hectares of the total land of India affected by flood, covering maximum 21.9%, almost 22% in Uttar Pradesh alone. Because in Uttar Pradesh, the maximum catchment area of Ganga, followed by Bihar, 12.71, almost 13%, then Assam, 9.4%, then West Bengal, around 8%, and Odisha, around 4%, and the rest of all the states altogether having about 43-44%. Therefore, the planning strategy also varies accordingly. So, talking about the flood management, so there are two different approaches of the flood management. First approach, second talks strategies. The approach which includes floods cannot be absolutely controlled. Yes, this is true because of the torrential rainfall, because of topography, because of hydrology, because of monsoon impact, cyclonic impact. 100% control over flood is not possible. But floods can only be managed to reduce flood losses. Loss of life and property can be reduced with the approaches. Talking about strategies, strategies includes modify the floods, modify the susceptibility to flood damage. Flood damage, I have found many successful stories that community at the village level, they develop the bandis, develop the earthen dam to protect the village and to divert the water of the river from the village. So, modify the susceptibility to flood damage by the community level. Then, modify the loss burden by the awareness of the people. We can reduce the loss of the lives and properties. The aware community, because of infrastructure development, they can reduce the loss. And there are number of successful stories in this regard. And if you compare, say 20 years back, 30 years back, 2 decades back, the population was hundreds of the millions less than today. But the loss of lives were more that time because of lack of awareness, lack of flood monitoring, lack of flood forecasting, lack of pre-disaster management and the post-disaster management. Friends, nowadays because of more responsible government, more aware government initiatives, also the functionaries, community participation, public awareness, public responsibility, self-help group, as well as individual responsibility, that has reduced the loss of the lives and property due to flood. Though the impact of flood is more because of big economy, big agricultural land, more industries, but because of awareness, its impact can be minimized. The susceptibility can be minimized. Burden can be minimized. And because of the increasing per capita income, gradually India is moving towards a developed nation, from developing country to developed country. So, gradually to bear the loss among the community is also becoming strengthening, so that people can cope up the loss of the resources and can regenerate the resource. So, enhancing the capability of the local community to cope up with the flood. Friends, if you see the measures of the flood. So, flood measures generally applies, will be divided into two different categories. First category are structural measures. Structural measures means physical works for modifying flood magnitude, means reducing the susceptibility to keep floods away from the people. The construction of the dams, constructions of the earthen dams, embankments of the rivers, embankments of the canals, construction of more and more number of roads, so that keep the flood away from the people by constructions. This is called development of structure, structural measures, and find so many examples in the world and number of examples in India. Through the structural measures, we are able to reduce the loss of life and property due to flood. You have a number of examples in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal. If you go to the areas like Gorakhpur, Basti, Devariya, Gonda, up to Balia, Gajipur, up to the coming to the Bihar, North Bihar, most of the earthen dams, this is called bandh, structural construction parallel to the river bank, so that the band of tolerance can be enhanced, so water cannot enter in the settlement areas in the agricultural field due to construction of the dams. It may be concrete dam, it may be earthen dam. Second measure is non-structural measures. Non-structural measures are the planned activities to modify susceptibility to flood damage. Planned activity to modify susceptibility to flood damage. Again, to keep people away from the flood. Two things we find the explanatory. In the structural, the effort is to keep floods away from the people. And in non-structural measure, analysis is to keep people away from the flood. So, planned activity to modify the susceptibility to flood damage. That includes the flood control measures, educating the people, technological know-how, application of the traditional knowledge, mixing the postmodern techniques to control the flood, awareness of the people, reducing the susceptibility to the damage to the flood, public awareness, pre-disaster, post-disaster planning, advanced planning, planning implementation, planning evaluation, all those stages, so that people may be aware and live away from the flood. So, in the structural measures, keep flood away from the people, and in non-structural measures, keep people away from the flood. They are the two most important parameters of the structural and non-structural flood management. In the structural management, structural measures management includes construction of embankments, flood walls, and ring bounds to keep flood away, construction of dams and reservoirs, improvement of surface drainage, river diversion, interbasin transfer, that is called interlinking the river, interbasin transfer, arrest of bank erosion by river training works such as spurs and revetments. When you find the construction, keep the flood away from the people. And in the non-structural measures, the planning implementation, flood planning, that is called flood forecasting and warning. So, flood forecasting. So, we have now, there are every river basin of India, almost every state having flood monitoring stations. Flood monitoring stations, and these flood monitoring stations providing advanced flood situation to make the people more alert, be aware, and be cautious to reduce the loss. So, flood forecasting and flood warning by measurement of the level of water in the river. Flood plain zoning, making the divisions of the river basin, that which area is danger area, which area habitable area, which area cropping area, and which are the areas of the river basin which are part of the flood plain, which are very, very susceptible, very sensitive to flood hazard. So, no any kind of commercial activities, residential activities allowed in the threat areas. Therefore, flood plain zoning is very, very important. Third important parameter we take, flood fighting. During the flood, how to reduce the loss of the flood, how to make the help to the people. First hand, to control the flood, make the flood away from the people, and now it can't be controlled 100% if there is occurrence of the flood. So, save the life of the people, save the resources of the country, and fight with the flood. Then, flood proofing. Flood proofing is a kind of initiative, whether initiative by the government, by the local community, by the individual, to minimize the loss, to minimize the impact of the flood at a household level or at a community level. That effort to minimize the loss from the flood is called flood proofing. Construction of the house in such a condition which can have least impact of the flood. In other words, you can say flood resistance initiative. Flood resistance initiatives called flood proofing. Flood insurance provide the post-flood response, financial support to the people, and finally relief and rehabilitation. Make the people safe during the flood, after the flood. Or another way you can say pre-flood time, flood time and the post-flood time. There are a lot of relief and rehabilitation system developed by NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority. Now government has very effective measures in the relief and rehabilitation. This is also because of the faster transportation facility, making the ease to approach the flood affected people. This is the most important initiative of the government. Ease of the approaching the flood prone people so that they get immediate response, they get immediate relief and later on they get proper rehabilitation. Friends, these are non-structural measures. Apart from these, other measures are reducing the rate of runoff by watershed management. Friends, watershed management is a tool in not only disaster management but also integrated resource management. Watershed management is a most important effective unit area of the planning and including the planning of disaster management, particularly flood. Improvement of river channel by dredging of the river, embankments of the channel so that river can carry out most of the water should not spread out as a flood. Construction of raised platform to be used during times of flood emergency. This kind of structural development you can find in many developed countries. Now it is time for India to develop construction of raised platform to be used during flood times in the flood emergency. And it's most required in the states like West Bengal, Assam, Bihar, Eastern Uttar Pradesh, where most of the areas are absolutely flooded with water. So raised platform will be a great help in the safeguarding the people. Afforestation of the catchment areas, and in the areas of the river catchment, afforestation is a tool, you can say biotechnology, eco-technology to control the flood and strengthening the meandering river channel so that most of the water drain out easily so that reduce the impact of the flood. Friends, flood forecasting and flood warning is the initiative which is taken by the government and community level. Flood forecasting and warning that require the steps like data collection, data transmission, data analysis and forecast formulation, and finally data dissemination of the forecast. And as I told you, for that there are number of the learning, number of hydrometeorological parameters regarding the data collection. What kind of data we required? We require the data, hydrological data like water, river water level data, river discharge data, hydrometeorological data like rainfall, other kind of precipitation like snow and hail. All these data, when we accumulate, that helps us in the forecasting and warning. Then we need data transmission. The data actually must go to the level of beneficiaries like wireless transmission, satellite transmission, telegraph transmission through telephone, to the telefax, to the telex, and data analysis and forecasting formulation for correlation, mathematical models for forecasting and warning, and dissemination. When we talk about the dissemination, so forecast include civil authority, other agencies, press, All India Radio, Doordarshan, so that this warning, forecasting, its dissemination can go at the mass level, rural level, community level, and other users, local representatives. So, dissemination, forecasting, very, very important tool. And for the future, we are going step by step ahead in the forecasting, monitoring, minimizing the loss, making the people more and more resilience to the flood. In the future scope regarding the flood management, the use of remote sensing and GIS data. Remote sensing and geographical information system has become a tool in disaster management. Friends, uses of the remote sensing and disasters had enhanced the disaster management efficiency. Disaster forecasting accuracy. Disaster forecasting accuracy to disaster management efficiency. More and more outcome is possible. Then more and more research and development regarding flood control and management. More information about weather, rainfall forecasting, flood forecasting modeling, capacity building of the people, local community, international cooperation, sharing the data when the two rivers are draining in 2 or 3 countries. For example, river coming from China to India, India to Pakistan. Similarly, river coming from China to India, India to Bangladesh, river Indus and Satluj, river Brahmaputra. Therefore, the international cooperation in the flood management, particularly in monsoon Asia, in South Asia, is very, very important. Countries like Nepal, India, Bhutan, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Tibet, China, India, Pakistan. There are so many international collaborations are very, very important necessity for the flood control. Friends, most of the rivers of India having the flood forecasting networks, like Ganga have maximum 85 centers, Brahmaputra have 27, Godavari 17, west flowing rivers have 15. So many rivers across the country have the flood forecasting to reduce the disaster management of the flood. So, flood management activities require 3 important components during the flood, pre-flood and the post-flood. So, pre-flood, during the flood and the post-flood, the points we had discussed. Then for the flood plain zoning. So, in the zoning, now the land use planning is very, very important. Define the planning areas, restrictive areas and prohibited areas. So, flood plain zoning is most important initiative to control the flood. Then zone regulation, having different kinds of priorities to control the flood. Then have future strategies like focused approach, basin-wise action plan, flood plain zoning, role of central government, funding of planned flood management works, adequacy of flood, the cushion in reservoirs. Then organizations related to flood management, the state flood control departments, Central Water Commission, Ganga Flood Control Commission, this is a major area of Ganga, Brahmaputra, Ministry of Home Affairs, Agriculture Ministry and the National Disaster Management Division. So, overall knowledge, action, integrated flood mitigation management, all these requires to control the flood. Friends, finally, all the talk which I had discussed with you, summarized in the last slide, that have all the pre-flood management, during the flood management, post-flood management, forecasting, warning, the relief to rehabilitation and structural to non-structural flood management. All our points were discussed and conclude this. If you have any question, you are most welcome, and I will discuss the cyclone in the next lecture. Till then, thank you very much. Hello friends, good afternoon. Next lecture is on cyclone and its severity, its impact, causes and consequences of the cyclone, spatial distribution of the cyclone at the global scale to national scale, then its impact. So, cyclone, considering a cyclone-prone country like India, why in India cyclone is most vulnerable? One of the most vulnerable disaster in India, as long coastline of about 7,516 kilometers of the flat coastal terrain, high population density, geographical location and physiological features of our coastal areas make India extremely vulnerable to cyclones and its associated hazards like storm, tide, high velocity of wind and heavy rains. Say, storm, tide, high velocity of wind and heavy rains, these are all associated with the cyclone. Though the frequency of the tropical cyclones covering the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea is the least in the world, it is 7% of the global total. But their impact on the east coast of India is relatively more devastating. An estimated 400 million people are vulnerable to cyclone-related hazards. Climate change and its resultant sea level rise can significantly increase the vulnerability of the coastal population. Friends, what is cyclone and why cyclone is a disaster? So what we can say, cyclone is a whirling mass of air. Cyclone is a whirling mass of air. And that whirling mass of air, cyclone, which is broadly divided into two categories called tropical cyclone and the temperate cyclone. Tropical cyclone, which develop in the sea surface always. There are other kinds of depressions which are formed on the land like tornadoes, dust devils. But cyclone, tropical cyclones are always developed on the sea surface. And that is two tropical areas. Tropical areas. So from 5 degree latitude to 30 degree latitude, both the hemispheres are prone to the area of tropical cyclone. And from 30 to 60 latitudes are the areas where there are mostly temperate cyclones are formed. Friends, because of the low velocity of wind among the tropical cyclone, temperate cyclones, so temperate cyclones are least vulnerable, least hazardous to the mankind. But the severity of hazard is very high among the tropical cyclones. Tropical cyclones do not form in the doldrum area. Friends, 5 degree north latitude to 5 degree south latitude to altogether known as doldrum area. 5 degree north of the equator to 5 degree south of the equator. Doldrum, because of the rotation of the earth, the force, rotation of the earth, their maximum centrifugal force. Due to centrifugal force, the condition to form the tropical cyclone is not possible. Therefore, equatorial zones, equatorial areas are free from the cyclone. So tropical cyclones are generally found between 5 degree latitude to 30 degree latitudes. Tropical cyclones are formed on the sea surface of the tropical ocean, and as soon as the temperature of the tropical ocean goes beyond 26.5 degrees Celsius, the condition of depression formation begins. And when the sea surface temperature touches 27 degrees Celsius, the depression supported by Coriolis force. Keep in mind that Coriolis force is the root cause for the origin of the tropical cyclone. If there is no Coriolis force, there is no whirling mass of air, the tropical cyclones could not be formed. For the formation of tropical cyclone, Coriolis force are essential. So warm sea surface of 27 degrees Celsius, condition for the formation of depression affected by Coriolis force. That makes whirling, and by whirling, large amount of moisture from the ocean is whirled and move up. Friends, those whirling nature of the mass of the air moving up carries huge amount of moisture from the ocean to the atmosphere. And because of Coriolis force and the speed, whirling speed, sometimes the whirling speed of the cyclone goes from 60 km per hour to more than 200 km per hour. And the area of the sea surface, ocean water, the formation of depression and distance from the sea coast, that determine the size and velocity of the cyclone. Because of the varying size and velocity of the cyclone and its impact on the cyclone, tropical cyclones are known with different local names. For example, the cyclone which developed in Japan, in the Pacific coast, Japan, called Typhoon. The cyclone which developed in China and Taiwan, known as Typhoon. The cyclone which developed along the northeast coast of the northern and coastal areas of the Australia, known as Willy Willy. The cyclone which developed in Indian Ocean, known as Chakravat. And the cyclone which developed in the Atlantic Ocean along the southeast of USA, Cuba, Mexico, they are called hurricanes. So different local names because of hurricanes, which are massive tropical cyclones with the maximum velocity of the wind speed. So hurricanes are known as the largest tropical cyclone. And also, the impact of the cyclone varies according to the population. For example, Willy Willy is also large-sized tropical cyclone. But you know, the Australia have very little population and very equipped to cope up with the disaster. So as soon as they get cyclone early warning and they move away from the coast, so loss of life, loss of property is minimum in Australia. As compared to India, friends, only 7% of the global tropical cyclone hit Indian coast. But because of size of population, because of density of population, eastern coastal plain of India, which is Coromandel plain, North Sarkar plain, see the density of population along the West Bengal coast, more than 1,500 persons per square kilometer. Coastal areas of Odisha, Andhra, Tamil Nadu having more than 1,000 persons per square kilometer. So because of more population, more and more density of population, the total number of people affected by cyclone in India is severe, its maximum goes around 4 million population. Entire eastern coast of India severely affected by cyclone. And on the west coast, states like Maharashtra, Gujarat are affected by cyclone. States like Karnataka, Goa, Kerala, they are free from the cyclone. This is because of the trade winds, easterlies. Friends, easterly winds, trade winds move from east to west. East to west. So the cyclone which develop in the sea water pushed by the trade winds, and also the storm track of the cyclone is also from east to west. Moving from east to west, it hit the east coast. That's why east coast is more severe to the cyclone disaster in India and the rest part of the world in all the tropical area. So east coast of Australia, east coast of India, east coast of USA, east coast of Japan, east coast of China. These are the most cyclonic vulnerable areas. So recently you have heard about the Harvey, the devastation done in the Louisiana and Texas states of USA by Harvey, where millions of the people were affected by the cyclone Harvey. Similarly, so many names you have heard about the cyclone. When the cyclone hits the coastal area, in India, eastern coast is a plain area and eastern coast is highly fertile. Eastern coast is a rice coast. There is a large scale rice cultivation right from West Bengal to Tamil Nadu. There are 3 rice crops grown every year. There is relay farming of the rice crops. There is pisciculture. There is more subsistence of the life. Therefore, there is very high density of population. Even having 3 rice crops in a year, the cropping is subsistence, intensive subsistence farming found along the east coast of India. And you can imagine what would be the impact of the tropical cyclone when it hits the east coast of India. Friends, east coast is subsistence coast and west coast of India is commercial coast, whether it is commercial industries, commercial mining or commercial farming. You go to the west coast, you find the veggiculture, plantation crops, tea, coffee, rubber, spices, cashew nuts, so many commercial crops, mining, commercial activities, industries, commercial activities, tourism, commercial activities, and free from the cyclone. East coast is mainly agrarian, that is 2 subsistence type of agrarian. Therefore, severity of the cyclone is very much along the east coast of India. Cyclone affects not only with the wind, also along with the tide. Water, tidal water that hits the coastal area and that has damage, because east coast of India is agricultural area. Due to agricultural area, there is more and more impact on agriculture. Impacts of the cyclone, you can see on the people, impact of the cyclone on the livestock, impact of the cyclone on rural housing stock, how houses become vulnerable, and crops, trees, telephone, electric poles, boats, the looms, the working implements, personal property, electricity, water and food supplies, infrastructure support, all these are damaged due to cyclone, and that have loss of the lives and loss of the property.
Sir, we have a caller from Varanasi. Yeah. I think we should take the call first and
Sure.
then we'll continue further. Now, hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes. Please tell your name.
Thank sir for such a wonderful lecture.
Thank you. We thanks Dr. B.W. Pandey
Ma'am,
for.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sir, I want to know about NAVIC, which is helpful in flood management to tackle cyclone and pisciculture and disaster management. Sir, please tell me about the NAVIC.
Yeah, that is the that initiative. We have a separate lecture for that. Today, the topic of the lecture is the cyclone disaster, its impact on the life and properties. The management, including the tools like NAVIC and other the kind of technological advancement like remote sensing GIS tools, which are very much effective in the coastal zone management. So NAVIC is not only for the cyclone mitigation, also it is very important tool for the integrated coastal zone management. Do you get it?
We believe that our caller might have got the answer what he was asking for, and definitely, as you said, this is planned in a separate lecture, and we'll try to cover that in an elaborative form in the forthcoming session. Dear friend, thank you for calling us. Yes, sir, we were studying the impacts of the cyclone, and now we are about to talk on the effects.
Yeah, the effects of the cyclone is the flooding in the coastal areas, erosion of the beaches, loss of soil fertility, loss of livelihood options and infrastructures. Friends, the flooding in the coastal areas, erosion of the beaches, loss of soil fertility, loss of livelihood options and infrastructures, these are the major visible impacts of the cyclone. And in the cyclone preparedness, required the vulnerability analysis and mapping to include resources. The vulnerability analysis and mapping is done through the techniques with the GIS, remote sensing, and the techniques NAVIC. Assess, strengthening requirement and execute. Funding for preparedness must be arranged. People's cooperation through political leaders, elders, volunteers and NGOs. The traditional knowledge through the elders also support in reducing the impact of the cyclone disaster. Plan to include movement of resources with time frame. Aim to reduce the destructive potential of cyclone, timely and appropriate relief to victims and quick and durable recovery. These are different initiatives to reduce the impact of the cyclone disaster, and the disaster preparedness framework. I'd like to present the components of the preparedness that includes vulnerability assessment, information system and response mechanism. Planning, resource base, public education and training. And finally, institutional framework, warning systems and rehearsals. So three components: vulnerability assessment through the planning and institutional framework, information system, resource base, warning systems, and response mechanism, that's public education and training and rehearsals, so that people can easily cope up with the cyclone disaster. Friends, warning, evacuation and mitigation, so-called cyclone response activities. They are very important initiative. Warning, evacuation, that's this part of mitigation, research and rescue, assessment, emergency relief, logistics and supply, communication and information management, survivor response and coping, security, EOC and coordination, expedite rehabilitation and reconstruction, and all these response mitigation activities, which includes role and players in disasters of the cyclone. Which is the role and the players in disaster cyclone: people as an individual, household as volunteers, to the Gram Panchayat, Sarpanch Panchayat Secretary, Panchayati members, village elders, caste, community religious leaders, teachers, doctors, engineers, retired army and police personnel, government departmental officers, agriculture, medical, engineers, housing and roads and building, irrigation, revenue department, public health, police, etc., and the non-governmental organization. Friends, all these people, they are the role players. Means cyclone disaster cannot be mitigated. It cannot be totally avoided, but its impact can be reduced through the awareness and community participation. One thing I'd like to add you here, that to reduce the impact of the cyclone on the coastal area, as you know, tropical cyclone develop on the sea surface, therefore it hits the coastal area. As soon as it enters along the coast, in the land, it becomes weak and ends. Therefore, coastal areas are severely affected by cyclone. So the cyclone management requires the coastal areas management. Therefore, I would like to mention that Integrated Coastal Zone Management Authority of India, Integrated Coastal Zone Management Authority has taken great initiatives to protect the coastal areas of India from a disaster like cyclone and tsunami. Friends, both the impact of the cyclone and tsunami, now the effort is to minimize the loss, minimize the impact, to save the coastal areas. Now the biotechnology, ecotechnology are the initiatives taken by the government. And you know that the plantation, conservation, plantation of the mangroves along the coastal areas. Mangroves are the kind of community of the flora which develops along the coastal areas where major roots are below the water and the leaves are above the water and the very high density. They protect the coastal areas from the cyclone and from the tsunami. The speed of tsunami goes down. The rate of whirling wind, speed of the wind goes down. Tidal waves from the sea coast to the coastal areas reduces due to the bars, fence. So the fencing of the mangroves along the coastal areas is a part of the ecotechnology, part of the biotechnology to reduce the impact of the flood, to reduce the impact of the tide, to reduce the impact of the cyclone, and finally to reduce the impact of the tsunami along the coastal area. Therefore, in cyclone disaster management, Integrated Coastal Zone Management Authority has taken strong initiative to save the coastal areas through the biotechnology, along with remote sensing GIS, NAVIC, and so many other postmodern techniques. The traditional knowledge, the plantation of the mangroves has become a tool, most important effective tool in cyclone management strategy. Thank you very much. If you have any question, you are most welcome.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. Thank you, dear friends, for watching us. And yes, you can give your feedback for this lecture by writing to us at info.cec@nic.in. When when Dr. B.W. Pandey visits the studio, yes, you can ask questions through the live session as well as through info.cec@nic.in. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much.